High above Cologne, an RAF bomber pilot suddenly breaks formation. He leaves the cloud cover and dives earthwards. His aircraft is damaged by flak, but he holds his nerve and presses home his attack. He scores a direct hit, and he lives to tell the tale. A skilled pilot taking a calculated risk? Sure, but there's a little more to it than that. Drugs. And now, a word from our sponsors. That's right. 9 out of 10 doctors recommend joining the Time Ghost Army.
Be an angel and come and help.
I'm Indy Neidell. Welcome to a World War II special episode on Allied amphetamines during the war. We've already talked about the Germans and their methamphetamine stimulant, Pervitin. Over 35 million of these assault pills were consumed by the Wehrmacht during the 6 weeks of the Battle of France in summer 1940. And if you have not watched that video, go and check it out. I've got my Walter Weiss gear out, and I mentioned my own misspent youth in Prague. But what about the Allies? Do they also try and gain an edge through drugs? Well, it takes a bit longer for the Allies to jump aboard the drug train. Amphetamines really go mainstream in Britain and America in the mid-1930s. Rather than the methamphetamine Pervitin, it is the amphetamine Benzedrine that takes the market by storm. Initially introduced as a nasal decongestant in 1933, it soon takes off in tablet form as Benzedrine sulfate. It quickly becomes prescribed for all manner of ailments. It's used in the treatment of narcolepsy, epilepsy, low blood pressure, and even alcoholism. Like Pervitin, it induces wakefulness and euphoria and reduces inhibitions. By 1936, it's being recommended as a pep drug for depression and anxiety. The Nottingham Evening Post calls it the drug that stops suicide. But like any drug, it's open for abuse, and students in Britain and America begin using Benzedrine as a study aid. For most, it's harmless, but there are reports of serious side effects, and in July 1937, when the Countess of Cardigan leaps from her room at the Savoy, an empty bottle of Benzedrine is found on her bed. The British Medical Journal calls for restrictions of sales in September 1937. In January 1939, Benzedrine is added to the poisons list, restricting it to prescription only. But when war breaks out in September the same year, there is a renewed interest in the drug. Benzedrine is officially prohibited in the RAF. Behind the scenes, though, the Flying Personnel Research Committee, the FPRC, is investigating the use of drugs to lessen fatigue. And it's just as well that professionals are tackling this issue because some RAF men are already covertly using personal stocks of Benzedrine. In August 1941, news reaches the FPRC of a junior officer trying to create a Benzedrine-infused chocolate bar. RAF Medical Officer Dr. Roland Winfield accompanies 20 Bomber Command missions between August 1941, July 1942 to test Benzedrine on crews. These are proper raids on places like Kiel, Hamburg, Essen, and the Ruhr. Boredom certainly isn't an issue. First, the men wait anxiously at base to hear about their targets. Then, they climb into their planes knowing they will soon face Messerschmitts and flak. Once at the objective, they need to maintain intense concentration while identifying their targets under fire. If they then survive the trip home over enemy territory, they can breathe a sigh of relief when they reach England. But even that's dangerous. After flying up to 5 hours under stress like this, accidents abound as exhaustion catches up during tricky landings. Winfield observes and interviews the men. He finds that those given Benzedrine are more alert and less anxious. They're also more willing to take risks. That pilot I talked about at the start, the one who dove through the clouds to hit his target, he is on one of Winfield's missions over Cologne. Really, though, most of his observations are more mundane. Significantly, he finds that Benzedrine is especially useful in keeping crews attentive during their risky return leg, and he is keen to emphasize that drugs are no substitute for proper rest. By the end of 1942, both Bomber Command and Coastal Command will approve the use of 2 5-milligram tablets of Benzedrine per man per mission. The Americans see the potential of Benzedrine for their pilots too. As they watch the Germans roll across Europe in 1940, a physiologist named Andrew Conway Ivey of the National Research Council, the NRC, reports that the Germans give Benzedrine to their dive bomber pilots and that this has favorable results in Poland. Ivy is confusing Pervitin with Benzedrine, but it shows the attitude in America. They don't just want to manage fatigue, they want to enhance performance and catch up with the Nazi super soldiers. So, from January 1942, Ivy examines whether drugs, including caffeine, Benzedrine, and various amphetamines, can help flight crews perform better at high altitude. He wants to boost what's known as psychomotor performance. These are the repetitive hand-eye coordination tasks carried out during flight. In parallel to this, David Bruce Dill is doing similar work at the Air Force's Aeromedical Laboratory. He tests out a similar range of drugs, assessing their effect on the bombing ability of crews after 10 hours of flying. In both cases, the drugs do seem to provide some marginal improvement, but the results are inconclusive as to which is best. And this is quite important. I mean, you'd rather give your men caffeine than Benzedrine, right? Well, not Ivy. He kind of glosses over the inconclusive results and recommends that if Benzedrine is no less effective and no more dangerous than caffeine, then there's no reason not to use it, right? The Air Force follows his advice, and by 1943 is issuing Benzedrine to pilots. But some commanders don't want to just raise performance or relieve fatigue, they want to boost morale. When Bernard Montgomery takes command of the British 8th Army in August 1942, his men are demoralized after a series of setbacks at the hands of Erwin Rommel. Monty wants his men to be fearless, and he thinks Benzedrine might help. To test this, in September 1942, he compares drugged versus undrugged infantry on a training exercise of 56 hours of rifle shooting, trench digging, signaling, and weapons maintenance. This is all wrapped up with a 7-mile march. The reports from the test highlight the increased snap and zest displayed by the soldiers on Benzedrine. Monty thinks that this snap and zest might give him the edge he needs. He orders 100,000 tablets for the attack on El Alamein that begins on October 23rd. They seem to go down well. The 24th Armored Brigade fights hard for 4 days and reports that the tank crews are in favor of the tablets, but there are some reservations. A 1944 report on the battle will discuss the abuse of Benzedrine by certain units. Drug-induced aggression and paranoia will be held at least partially responsible for incidents such as the brigade's firing on its own infantry on October 28th. Monty is happy though. In November, he goes even further than the RAF and gives permission for Middle East forces to use up to 20 milligrams of Benzedrine per day for up to 5 days. This isn't actually a huge amount. Medical opinion into the 21st century will regard it as quite reasonable. But just think of the implications. That's up to 5 days of marching and fighting with little to no sleep fueled by stimulants. Sparty has already covered combat fatigue and PTSD. It is no wonder that cases are rampant during the fighting in North Africa. By 1943, both the U.S. Army and the Marines have jumped on the trend. Ivy works with the Army through 1942, testing a variety of stimulants on the men at Fort Sheridan, Illinois, on 10 to 12-mile marches with full packs. By the beginning of 1943, there's little evidence that amphetamines provide a measurable performance boost. Like Monty, though, Ivy reports that amphetamines increase confidence and raise the morale of worn-out men. Sore feet and other minor injuries are disregarded. The Marines conduct tests in April 1943 at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. 100 volunteers are split into 2 groups, A and B. After a day of exercises and work, the squads march 25 miles in full combat gear. Both groups are then given tablets to be taken every 6 hours. Group A, placebos. Group B, 10 milligrams of Benzedrine. This goes on for 40 hours of marksmanship, war games, drills, and calisthenics. Group A struggles to stay awake, but Group B remains alert even after 30 hours. Again, Benzedrine apparently helps with morale. An officer writes, "On the march, the pills were very exhilarating, with the B's leading the parade, the A's eating dust and not liking it." Yet, it's not all positive. Just like in the desert, there are several cases of hallucinations. A captain from Group B recalls sitting around a campfire with his comrades. One fire became a burning bungalow, another a ruby bracelet. The trees are the corner posts of a building inside of which I am. No conception seems too fantastic for acceptance. Marines go off on fruitless searches for girls emerging from the fire, while another man sees it transform into a waterfall. Not only has this concerning side effect popped up at Camp Lejeune and in North Africa, but at sea with tests by the Royal Navy too. Under the pressure of war, it's ignored for now, but what we're seeing are some of the early recorded cases of what will become known as amphetamine-induced psychosis. We're now at the stage where Benzedrine is standard issue for Allied combatants. But let's stop for a moment. We can have a bit of fun talking about enterprising RAF officers creating Benzedrine chocolate bars and young Marines believing that women are emerging from their campfires, but really, millions of men are being handed drugs to keep them fighting for days on end and to overcome the very real fear of losing their lives. As the tempo of the air campaign over Germany is raised ever higher, the RAF will need more and more Benzedrine to keep their anxious and exhausted men going. In the Pacific, Benzedrine will be with the Marines as they island hop towards Japan. As fresh-faced conscripts encounter the desperate resistance of experienced Japanese soldiers dug into mountainside pillboxes, commanders will dish out tablets to their terrified men. By the end of the war, the British as a whole will have ordered 72 million tablets. It's harder to get accurate figures for the Americans, but they were definitely more liberal with their orders. Most estimates lie somewhere in the region of 250 to 500 million tablets, even allowing for the greater size of the American forces. This is still a greater number of pills per combat troop per year. That is not to say that everyone's popping pills all the time. In the RAF, at least, some pilots shun them altogether. They feel it's a sign of weakness to be doped up on the job. But it has been normalized, and you can bet that it's not just Benzedrine that men and women are using to get themselves through the horror of this war. The big question is, what's going to happen once this is all over? Well, I can peer into the future and tell you, tens of thousands of military personnel will return from the war dependent on Benzedrine. By 1945, an estimated 30 million pills will be pumped out every month for civilians in the U.S. Fierce competition between manufacturers will drive consumption ever higher in the 50s and 60s. By the end of the 20th century, addiction to amphetamines and methamphetamine will be a major public health crisis in the United States and beyond. And the militaries around the world will continue to issue Benzedrine tablets. Whew! If you missed our two-part series, Nazis on Crystal Meth, you can check out part 1 right here. And to get ever more content like this, well, not always drug-related, but still, join the Time Ghost Army at timeGhost.tv or patreon.com. See you next time.